Well, folks, we got a good treat for you today on the Michael Steele Podcast. I've got James Comey coming through to talk about his new crime novel, Central Park West. We know James as a prosecutor, defense lawyer, FBI director, general counsel, teacher, but not so much as a crime novelist. And he's a pretty damn good one. We're going to talk with talk to James about the book. We're going to get into some of the characters and how they may or may not reflect some real people we all know, and how all of this going forward, how this book sort of talks about the state of the relationship between the investigative agencies and FBI and police, and how that reflects on us as a country. We're going to have that conversation here on the Michael Steele Podcast, coming up right after this. Well, everybody, welcome to the Michael Steele Podcast. I'm excited about our conversation today because we got this brother up in here and he's shocking the world because we see a whole nother side of James Comey that we just didn't know. I bet you James didn't know. He had such mad writing skills. Welcome to the podcast, dude.
It's so great to be with you, Michael. Thanks for having me on.
It's great to have you. I mean, you've hit an incredible home run with this new book, Central Park West. And it debuted at number one. It has a lot of folks sort of clocking their heads. Nicole Wallace is a big fan of the book, and a lot of our mutual friends. It's just really, it's got to be refreshing for you coming out of such a very, I'll put it in these terms, but I hope you know what I mean, formal, stiff environment in which there's protocol and processes, to be able to sit down and just unleash, some like free flowing. This is what I really think. This is how I see this kind of vibe. How did this book come about for you? I mean, is it always been there? Or is it just something that's like one morning you woke up and you said to your wife, you know what? I think I'm going to write a book.
Yeah, I never, it's funny you said that. I keep meeting people who will say to me, geez, you're much funnier than I thought you were. And I say, there really weren't all that many opportunities for hilarity at the FBI, especially when I was there. But I love to write. As a kid, I loved stories. I wrote fiction. And then I stopped and got into the nonfiction space through journalism and then obviously through government. And I was pushed by the editor of my second nonfiction book, which was just a collection of stories trying to illustrate what the values of the Department of Justice have to be, but they were stories taken from cases I had done. And so that was fun storytelling, but of real cases. And my editor kept saying, you write narrative well, you write dialogue well, this scene is really good. And I would say, dude, that's not a scene, that's my life. And he would say, no, but you ought to consider writing like crime fiction. And I said, no. And he said, maybe we could match you with a professional, one of these accomplished writers, a James Patterson. And I said, nah, because I said, I've always loved to write, but I don't want to do that. That seems a little silly. And then the farther I got from getting fired, the farther I got from the work. And I think the work is what had made it so hard for me for decades to read crime or espionage or terrorism fiction. And so as I got away from the work, I thought, maybe I'll give it a shot. And I started doing it and found it addictive. And I'm excited, but I'm also nervous because this is what I want to do when I grow up now. But I found it much harder than nonfiction and also a lot more fun. So there was never a plan. I guess with all of my life, there's never been a plan, but there was never a plan. And now I found something that brings a lot of joy.
And that's the bottom line. That's it right there. The thing that brings you joy and the thing that, regardless of where you are in your life, it's kind of puts you in a different spot, which my sense in reading the book is that's what it did for you. I mean, this reads like a combination of real life experiences, as well as also how you probably would have played some scenes out in your mind in some of the cases that you've had. It's like, okay, you can sort of see the sort of TikTok process. So to get the listeners into the moment so they can really taste what we're talking about, set this up for us. Set up the book. Give us a sense of the scene. I mean, what is this about? How does this come together and gets us on that roller coaster?
Yeah, the book is about a federal prosecutor working in Manhattan at the United States Attorney's Office. And her name is Nora Carlton, and she is working on a case trying to put away at long last a mobster who's eluded justice for a long time. And she's so focused on that case, she's not paying attention to a case that the DA is prosecuting in state court just down the street. You can see the two buildings from one from the other. And it's a big tabloid case involving the murder of a former governor, and she's not reading the tabloids. But then those cases slam together in a way she never could have expected. And it's that slamming together that takes her on the journey that consumes the rest of the book. The Nora, together with her sidekick, her mafia investigator, an enormous Brooklynite named Benny Dugan, go on this journey trying to figure out what's true and trying to get the bad guys in a really complicated, difficult environment. And so you're right that I'm trying to take the readers inside the world that I knew. I was a mob prosecutor. I was the chief federal prosecutor there. And I know it in a very current way because my daughter is the inspiration for the protagonist. My daughter, when I wrote this, she was the chief of the Violent and Organized Crime Unit in the Southern District of New York. And she was literally standing on her feet in the same courtroom where I prosecuted mobsters when she was 4 years old. She was in that same courtroom prosecuting Ghislaine Maxwell, who was Jeffrey Epstein's partner in abusing young girls. And she wouldn't let me go to the trial. She said it would be, quote, a thing if you go, Dad, close quote. And I don't know what
Don't you love it when your kids come back at you like that? Nah,
yeah, I don't know what that means exactly, but it meant, Dad, you can't go.
Right.
And so my wife went. I got the reports from her. And so it made perfect sense to have the protagonist be a woman. I would write and think about my daughter, which made it a labor of love. And the action is in a courtroom, 318, that I spent a big part of my life, and that my daughter, when I was literally writing it, was spending a big part of her life. And so it's the story of Nora Carlton. And I mentioned Benny Dugan, who's also inspired by someone I knew and loved, the world's greatest organized crime investigator who died in 2006. And so writing about these people I love through the work that I did through a current day lens is why I say it was a ton of fun to do.
So it's no secret in the book, and it's pretty clear that, you know, the real players, the hard chargers, you know, the good guys that are sort of running this narrative are all women. And it is an interesting, really kind of untold secret in the legal community. And there's more writing about it today, as, you know, people looking at the composition of law schools and seeing that it is clearly a field that women are excelling in, and they're now the majority of most law school classes around the country. But it's not that storyline. I was talking to a seasoned attorney, female attorney recently, who started her practice in the late 70s, and talking about that time for her. And then when you see stories like this, a lot of people will go, well, that's fiction. You know, he's giving her more power than she actually has. And that's not necessarily true. I mean, it's the power the women exercise in this book is real, and it is consistent with what's happening out in the real world from your experience, I presume, but both at the state level and the federal level.
Yeah, that's a great catch. And Nicole Wallace was struck by the same thing, that the good guys, as she said, and the bad guys are both women in my book. And that reflects my lived experience. I said I wanted to bring it up to the current day. And when I was an assistant U.S. attorney, the overwhelming majority of the prosecutors were men. And then when I became U.S. attorney, the boss, after 9/11 in Manhattan, that was changing, moving closer to half and half. And then it moved beyond that as the elite law schools became majority female in their student body. My daughter's U.S. Attorney's office, most of the supervisors are women, I think, at this point, including herself. And so I wanted it to reflect that. And it's also my life. I mean, I have 4 smart, strong, tall daughters. I'm married to a smart, strong, although not tall woman. And so my life has been surrounded and shaped by them. They've made, as they would say, it's a continuing project. They've made me better. But I wanted to reflect both the demographics of what law enforcement in the Southern District of New York looks like now, and how I've seen the world, how I've been shaped by it.
How are the tensions that you write about in the book? How does that translate to how cases like this unfold during the normal course? Some of it, I guess, I found in my experience, I was not on the litigation side, I was on the corporate side of law. And so tension for us was very different from the tension the litigators had down the hall. We were worried about whether or not $32 billion would land before 2:00. That's, trying to close the deal. You guys are worried about whether or not the bad guy literally would go to jail for the rest of their lives. But how do you, because you write about those tensions and it really comes across. I mean, how did that sort of focus your mind and sort of bringing the reader into those scenes where you have these moments where you have the institutions, you have the bad guys, you have the good guys within the institutions who are trying to do the right thing but running into all kinds of crazy. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. The tensions are a bit of a layer cake. There's institutional tension, there's personal tension. And the institutional tension in New York is unique because in Lower Manhattan, you could stand in the middle of Foley Square, which is right outside the federal courthouse, and turn in a circle and see 4 institutions without moving. You can see the FBI, the largest FBI field office by far, is off Foley Square. The U.S. Attorney's Office is there. So the oldest, proudest U.S. Attorney's Office, and at times the best, but there's lots of other great U.S. Attorney's offices in my experience. And then you can look by the U.S. Attorney's Office and peek and see One Police Plaza, the headquarters of the NYPD. And then just to your left, down the street, you can see the Manhattan DA's office. And so you've got these 4 big, proud, old institutions. And just taking the FBI and the NYPD, it's sort of a Godzilla and King Kong kind of thing.
Right.
You've got gigantic organizations and throw those 2 proud prosecutors in the middle. I described the relationship among those one time as we were blood sworn enemies unless we were living together and having a baby. And the living together is the most successful counterterrorism effort in the United States over decades has been in New York because those agencies joined together to fight terrorism. But when they're not together, they are competing over the work and stabbing each other in the back, trying to get the best cases from each other. So the institutional tension is very real. Let me stop there before I get to the personal tension.
No, go to the personal tension. I just, it's because it's a component of the whole thing. It's what it animates reactions and results as much as the professional tension, between the agencies, which, growing up in Washington is something that I've always got to see firsthand. Sometimes the Hollywood dramatizes it a little bit too much for effect, but there is a legitimacy to that tension, even within departments over particular cases. But then you layer on top of that the sort of personal drama too. It's, moving up the ranks, it's holding position that you may currently have. All those things also come into play.
Yeah, when I became U.S. Attorney, so I went up there while the Trade Center site was still smoking. President Bush asked me to go, a total surprise to me. I'd never even thought about it, but they asked me to go back because I was acceptable to both political parties that had a logjam in New York, and I had done terrorism work, and I had started my career there. So I go back, and I discovered that our relationship with the DA's office down the street is at an all-time low. the longtime DA who had been U.S. attorney in the 60s, Robert Morgenthau, from a legendary family, is really mad at the U.S. attorney's office because he believes, with some justification, that my office screwed him out of some important white-collar securities fraud cases by charging the cases before he could. And the effect that had in New York was, under the New York Constitution, if the feds charged a case, it was over for the state. The reverse was not true. The state could charge a case first and the feds could follow under the U.S. Constitution. So they were really pissed at us. And so I decided I would try to build the relationship back, and I invited Bob Morgenthau to lunch. And he said, sure. And then he walked me across this little park behind his office to a restaurant called Forlini's, which sat just behind the courthouse, where we sat in a booth that had his name in a brass plaque on it. So already I'm feeling an imposter, because what am I doing as the U.S. Attorney in New York? Now I'm sitting with Bob Morgenthau, and he wants updates on the things where we're having a baby, where we're doing things together. The problem is the man was hard of hearing. And so he would ask me for an update, and I would lean forward and whisper, because these were sensitive investigations. Sure. It's a crowded restaurant, but he can't hear me. So he starts saying, what? I just need an update on this. And I want to give it to him because I don't want him to continue to be furious at us, but I also don't want the rest of the patrons to hear about a grand jury investigation. And so I did my absolute best, but I don't think I accomplished the goal. And so the relationship stayed uneven after my whispered attempts to solve the problem. And in a way, there was genius in that, not from the U.S. Attorney's perspective or maybe the DA's, but maybe from the citizen's perspective, because there was the competition generated energy and a pursuit of excellence that would not have been there had it been, one close, clubby relationship where we don't steal each other's work. The stealing of each other's work drove us to be better. And so I've tried to capture that here. And obviously it generates personal tensions. I write some scenes that are drawn from real life where they really are angry at each other. Right. But it reflects an overall institutional tension that I think by and large is good for the citizens of New York.
Yeah, I was going to ask you how that, some of those scenes, were they really kind of based on actual conversations or actual moments in which, the brass is in loggerheads with the brass of another, agency, and in the end, they seem to work it out. There is, there's not a loose end that's left, unaddressed in effect, which then also begs the question, which, if any, of the characters, given these scenes, were inspired by real people? Because there's some doozies, and so there have to be a few folks that we may all be familiar with.
Yeah, I don't want to give too much away. Yeah, I mean, the advice I got was write what you know, and so I've tried to draw from real scenes, real cases. In the cases, I actually went back and got trial transcripts out, so I got the dialogue exactly right as it happened to me, because I found the work incredibly exciting, and I think the reader will too, without me having to make stuff up about how the work goes.
Right.
And I did find, look, my lived experience is that investigators, prosecutors are overwhelmingly people trying to do the right thing in the right way. And of course, there are exceptions to that. And of course, those exceptions are important and bring shame on the profession. But I don't need prosecutors and investigators to be breaking the law to generate excitement. And they didn't in the overwhelming main of my experience. And so I've tried to write what happened to me. I made sure that my children obviously read it, and especially my oldest daughter, to make sure I was being current and real. But I've hidden a fair number of Easter eggs in there that only people who know are going to know, and so I don't want to give it away. I was asked. Someone, I was hired as a federal prosecutor by a guy named Rudolph Giuliani in 1987, who seemed, what's the right word? Seemed different to me then.
Yeah, it's different then. Yeah.
And so someone asked me, is there a character based on Rudy? And I said, I'm not going to start going there. I said, you read and see what you think, but my job
y'all need to read the book.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
We'll just put it that way. And I think for me, that's the beauty of the writing, it is seamless in that regard. It's not, when you're introduced to the characters, it doesn't seem contrived. And that's hard. That's why I think a lot of people, James, was kind of surprised by, really, this is the guy's first book in this genre, because sometimes they can come off a little bit forced. But the book, but you don't get to number one without having a connection with readers, and because that's ultimately what it's all about. And you find the way to draw people into these storylines. And there's some old tried and true, the mob is always a good storyline. I mean, they're just good for drama. They really are. But again, it's not contrived. You get the feel of the city, you get the feel of, the players involved. How much rewriting did you have to do to get it down to that point where you finally sit back and go, that's the scene? It's like a director directing a scene, and okay, cut. Let's stand over there. try the dialogue from that window as opposed to that window, right?
Yeah, a lot is the answer. I mean, I love to write. I've always written. Somebody asked me during an interview recently, did you have a ghostwriter? And I said, thank you very much. But no, hell no, I didn't have a ghostwriter. But what I had was, what I needed was a lot of people, starting with my wife, who loved me enough to tell me what sucked.
Right.
And
they're good at that.
Oh, they're really good.
They're good at that.
And I found a way to do that spared me pain, because what she and I would do is I would write, and she would review it on a Google Doc, and she would comment. And that allowed me not to get her feedback face to face. And so I would take my laptop and go somewhere outside and look at the Google Doc. And then I'd go through, I don't know what you go through, but I go through a process. My first reaction is, nah, she's wrong.
Right.
And the next step is, she might have a point here. And then the last step is, yeah, she's right. Damn
right.
It. And so I could do that myself. And so it took a lot of rewriting. Some scenes I just nailed. Others, she would read them and say, doesn't seem real to me, seems forced. Or she would often notice something that's hard to do in fiction. She would notice my characters drifting, that she'd say, Benny is starting to sound like this character, and that's not Benny. So go back and look at that again. And so I'd say,
wow.
By myself, I'd look at that and say, nah, she's wrong. Then I'd say, maybe she's right. Then I'd say, she's definitely right. And so a lot of it is that an author, John Green, I saw him once say that your first draft is just taking a gigantic block of stone out of a quarry. That's your first draft.
Yeah.
It's not anywhere near a statue yet. And then the rest is just cutting. And the trick for me here was find those people who will tell me the truth. So I have a concentric circles. My wife's in the middle. My 5 kids are the next circle. Then a group of friends. I don't know whether they would admit this, but seem to take joy in finding things that I didn't do well. And so that group of people, which is like 10, 12 people, those 3 circles, they would say, no, you screwed this up. No, you screwed this up. Then I would take all that feedback and go back and chisel more.
Right.
So that's the hardest part of writing, is that the rewriting, the editing. And then you give it to the publisher. And in the main, they actually really liked it. And so there wasn't much to do there, but a ton of work between draft and that.
How did you, because your background, obviously, as a prosecutor, there are a lot of real life dramatic stories that can be found in the cases that you've prosecuted over the years. Certainly the high level of criminal cases you've been involved in are, they're substantive, but you settled on sort of the mafia theme. What was it about that? I said before that those storylines can be a little bit dramatic because the characters are just so great in real life, in some respect. So what pushed you into that space as opposed to, money laundering or human trafficking or some other storylines that in one sense can be a little bit more gritty?
Yeah. Well, it was my wife who pitched the story idea. And I think what she was thinking, which made sense to me, is almost thinking about it chronologically in terms of my career, I
Mm-hmm.
started out in Manhattan working for Rudy. I started out working on mafia cases. And so we have in mind, because she's my idea person, to do the next book, which I've already written, involves Nora Carlton and Benny, but in a very different place. Before I went to the FBI, I was the general counsel of the world's largest hedge fund. And so the next book is a crime novel that takes place in that strange and wonderful and sometimes weird world.
Yeah.
That will take readers inside of that. And
then
you're
more in my alley. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And so that will tell a story through that world that I hope people will find really interesting. And then the third book in the New York series, which the publisher told me not to say much about, but I think that'll be back in Lower Manhattan with themes of white supremacy, terrorism, which is a real challenge now in this country. And again, told through the lens of what I've seen with the FBI and the Department of Justice. But then I'd like to move on. I'd like to write 3 books based in Richmond, Virginia, where I was a federal prosecutor. And because there's really interesting and important issues of law enforcement and race, Richmond, as you know, has a really interesting and painful history.
Right.
And then I haven't written about Washington or thought about it because I found it too icky right now. But I have stories I think that would be fun that would take readers inside the institutions of our national government that I've seen up close and that you know so well. And so, but I think it will be fun to take people to those places through the vehicle of fiction. So that's how it started. Her idea was start with, how about this idea? You started out as a mafia prosecutor, your daughter's now there. How about starting there? And that's where it began.
I really appreciate the last point about Washington and the ickiness, for sure. I get that question a lot. Why haven't you written the book about your time, coming up in politics in DC, and then of course in Maryland, and getting elected and doing all these things, and certainly the RNC. And my response has basically been, when I write the book, I'm done with politics. Because all those mofos are gonna get burnt. Everybody's gonna get burnt.
I'm glad you haven't written it, because we need you on the stage still.
So I figured I'll just hold my powder, and then I'll let you know what I really think of rights. James Comey is the author of the book is Central Park West. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, I got to go there, just do a little politics with the man. So we're going to do that with James Comey right after this. Welcome back, everybody, to the Michael Steele Podcast. Really engaging, fun conversation with author. I'm almost hesitant to say new author, but because his brother's written like he's been doing this for 20, 40 years, But the book Central Park West is a crime novel, which is quite the rage from New York to DC to Miami to California. People love it. I'm glad we're talking about it. I do want to shift a little bit because I got James Comey, so don't get this moment too often. I will start big, and then we can get a little bit more narrow in the thinking. And what's your assessment right now when you're looking at, as someone who's been inside the bubble with the former president, certainly your leadership of the FBI, and sort of the fits and starts of all of that. How are you assessing the institution right now? We've got Republicans running around talking about defunding the FBI. These are the same people who were bitching about the Democrats, those Democrats who were talking about defunding local police, and they want to defund the friggin' FBI. We know that has an impact, whether you're talking about local police and certainly the men and women who serve in the agency, on morale. It has an impact on how they go about their jobs. What's your assessment of where things are right now?
Yeah, I think the agency is suffering. By the agency, I mean the men and women who make it up. Look, it's insane to think that Republicans are walking around saying the FBI is a bunch of leftist Marxist targeting Republicans. It's just, anyone who knows the FBI and law enforcement, that's just crazy.
It's crazy.
But people keep saying it. And look, even though people inside the FBI know it's nonsense, know this sense, which frankly they've heard from both wings of the politically engaged part of our world,
Right.
that you're out to get my team. They know it's silliness, but it hurts their ability to do the job, because at the heart of their ability to do the job is being seen as an other in American life. When they knock on a door, promise a witness something, or stand up in a courtroom and say, here's what I found in this executive's drawer, or here's what I heard, or here's what I saw, they have to be seen not as Republicans or Democrats, but as the good people, just trying to figure out what's true, because that's what they are in reality. And not being seen that way gets in the way of their ability to protect America, to protect communities. And so they're feeling that and feeling a little bit of pain from that. Now, I say it that way because I think they also know in the long run, they'll be fine. The American people understand the nature of this institution, but at the margins, it makes the work harder, and that's a source of pain for them.
From that very awkward moment that was captured of Trump calling you as you were trying to fade into the curtain.
Yes.
and you're what are you, 6'5", 6'6"?
6'8".
6'8". Yeah, you're a big boy. It's only so much hiding a brother your size can do. I mean, the curtains in the White House are tall, but and from that moment where you get pulled forward, and then the various narratives that unfolded thereafter, culminating in Trump firing you in 2017. First, I guess two parts. That image for me in watching it, because I know Trump and I knew what he's doing in that moment. He was marking his territory in that moment with you. I don't think people really appreciated that. Probably some do now, but when you look at it, he was really kind of marking, this is my FBI director.
Yes.
I control. So I'm going to show you how much I could tell everyone in the room I control you, and to let you know I control you. I'm pulling you up and I'm force this image where you have to come because I called you. You have to shake my hand because I want you to. And a lot of people miss that subtlety about Trump. Which in some sense is not so subtle. But how did that have an impact as you look at the arc thereafter on your thinking about the job and the relationship of independence from the White House as the FBI director?
I mean, I saw it in the moment. That was an event in the Blue Room on the ground floor of the White House residence. And at first, I thought it was a nice idea. My staff said, President wants to host a reception for the leaders of the agencies who safeguarded the inauguration, which is a lot of agencies. And so I knew my colleagues from Secret Service and Park Police and DC Police would be there. And I know these people and like these people. And so I thought, well, that's kind of nice, but I don't want to go because it's in the middle of the NFL conference championship games. And so I want to watch football. Why is the president having this on a Sunday late afternoon? But then my team said, no, you got to go. So I go, and I'm comfortable. And then I see his staff bring in TV Klieg lights. And I thought, oh God.
There we go.
So I really did stand against the curtain and didn't think it was going to protect me until his eyes passed me and he called the head of the Secret Service up. And I thought, why did he not see me? I'm a 6'8" white guy standing against this curtain. And it's a true story. I looked at my suit and I thought, whoa, my suit kind of matches this curtain. So I leaned farther back. True story. I leaned farther back into the curtain. So why am I doing that? Because I am not only not on anyone's team politically, I don't want to be seen as on anyone's team, because I'm leading an institution that for half a century, the American people have said, we don't want you on anybody's team. President Obama constantly stressed to me, as did, I was confirmed 94-1. I met nearly all of those senators. They all said the same thing, Democrat and Republican. You need to keep the FBI out of politics, keep it independent. So there I am leaning into the curtain thinking, I do not want to be seen as on anybody's team. Then he notices me and he calls me forward. And it's funny, another part of the true story. as I walked across this long room, I'm thinking, oh my God, this is awful. And my wife is home watching it on TV live with one of my kids. And she turns to one of my kids and says, "That's Dad's oh shit face."
Yes.
And so it was my oh shit face. And I walk forward and I know what he's doing. I'm not as politically experienced as you are, but I knew what he was doing. And I knew it even more when he grasped my hand and tried to pull me into a bro hug.
That's it.
And that's when I tightened my side. I'm tall, but not real strong, but strong enough to resist him. And in some ways it was worse because the cameras were to my left. And when I resisted, the only thing he could do was lean forward to my right ear.
Yeah.
And it looked to all the world like the man kissed me. And instead he just whispered, "I really look forward to working with you." And then wanted me to stand up there with him. And I said, no, of course. Basically, I'm not worthy, meaning, are you out of your frickin' mind? And so I backpedaled back to my curtain. So why is it so bad? Because perception matters when you lead an agency like the FBI. And I was not on Trump's team. I was not on Hillary Clinton's team, even though at various points, partisans on both sides thought we were on the other side's team. I had to be apart from that. And Trump worked very, very hard to stop me from staying apart. And then, of course, then asked me to come to another thing that I thought was a group dinner. It turned out to be a one-on-one at a tiny table in the green room.
Yeah, that's the ambush conversation. That's the one you always you know it's coming. You just don't know when it's coming. It's his way of kind of again locking in and making sure you understand the nature of how he sees the relationship or wants the relationship to be. You talked about, the Hillary Clinton, and that seemed to be a troubling period during that, the tail end of that campaign. Democrats say, but for your public statements and comments, Hillary would have won. I don't know about that. Politics is not that linear, and it certainly doesn't rest on one event. If she spent a little bit more time in Wisconsin and in Michigan, and maybe things could have been different. But nonetheless, what is the thinking behind making, and we see this now with Merrick Garland, and I think I could say, and I think a lot of people say, he learned a lot from your experience in terms of how to deal with these more prickly public pronouncements, and that may or may not relate to investigations. But what was that process like for you, given the nature of that campaign and where we were at that time, and then to come back and have the follow up? I mean, it was like a 1-2 punch almost. Yeah. How does that internalize itself and get to the point where you have that public pronouncement?
Yeah, it's, first of all, the thing is a total nightmare. I remember when the investigation opened in 2015, my deputy looked at me with a slight smile and said, "You're totally screwed, right?"
All right.
Meaning, in this polarized environment, half of our politically engaged are going to be furious no matter where you end up. And we managed to piss off both, I suppose, which is amazing. But here's how it ended up. We worked very hard for a year and investigated the heck out of that case, and concluded that there was no there was no case. And the idea that there's a resemblance between the Clinton case and Trump's current indictment is ridiculous.
Yeah.
Only those who don't want to see can say it that way. But we ended up in a place where by the summer of 2016, we were done. We had offered transparency to the American people so they would trust the results, said, look, here's why. Here's what we did. Here's what we found. Here's what we think about it. And characterized her conduct, which I think you can't offer an explanation without characterizing the conduct, but then it was over. And the only thing left was for the Republicans to beat on the Department of Justice and the FBI, saying that we basically pulled our punches with Hillary Clinton. And so both the Attorney General and I spent the summer defending the work. I testified repeatedly and took all their questions and fought back, saying, no. We did all this work. We're done. You can trust this result. The American people can trust this result. It's over. There's no there. Go away. The election can go on with us having nothing to do with it. That's where we want to be. And then I found out on October 27th that all of that sworn testimony was not true, that it not only was not over, that what they had found on Anthony Weiner's laptop, hundreds of thousands of her emails, not only was dwarfed anything we'd found before that, but my team said could change the result, and we can't finish this work before the election. And so all of a sudden, you're sitting there as the FBI director, and two norms are crashing into each other. You don't want anything to do with an election, ever, 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 if you can avoid it.
Right.
You also always correct testimony that you've given if it turns out to be untrue. And so I have two choices at that point. I can say nothing, which would be an action, and leave that testimony uncorrected, leave the American people with the impression that we're done, there's no there, go away, you can trust us, we're the FBI, we're the Department of Justice. Or I can tell Congress that what I told you under oath is not true, but I don't know exactly what to make of it, but you ought to be on notice that we need to do some more work. Both of those doors lead to hell. Both of them suck.
Mm-hmm.
But there's only two alternatives. Either you speak or you don't speak, and not speaking is to conceal. And so the question for us was, which of those doors, which are both terrible, oh God, which path is most consistent with the values of the Department of Justice? And which is the least bad option? And so we chose the least bad option. And lots of people tell me they would have done differently. Okay, I respect that. I find that a little hard to believe. If you went back in time, you're really going to fool the American people before a presidential election?
Right.
Really? You're going to do that as the FBI director?
You're then stuck, James, with the problem of you don't know what those 100,000 emails and what's on Weiner's laptop, what's really there, right? So you don't know that. You know it, all of a sudden you've got to deal with it, right? And if she goes on and gets elected, then where are you? Right. And so you have, I mean, at what point do you come forward with what this additional information may or may not hold? It's always the challenge when there's a development in a story that you thought was concluded.
Yeah. And forget political people. The average American, so dead center in our bell curve, finds out after the election that you, the FBI, not only knew that we were relying upon inaccurate information, but you were engaged in an investigative activity that you knew might result in a different outcome, and you didn't tell us after telling us the opposite all summer long under oath, right? 3 weeks ago, you told us this thing's done in testimony before the House Oversight Committee. And so, look, I get how people see that differently, but I always say I said to my team, no one will ever see this the way we do, because everyone else will be looking back down a path at this decision point.
Right.
And so no one's ever going to fully understand this. But okay, there's a freedom in that, in that you know that you're totally screwed. What my deputy said a year earlier was right. And so we made a decision. Now, I'm really proud of the way the decision was made, the things we thought of, the integrity of that decision. And I'll fight that to the day I die, even if people think of it differently. But the idea that we were trying to elect Donald Trump or elect Hillary Clinton is just crazy. And I also knew that each of these doors was going to damage the FBI. In fact, to be fully honest, I tried, not a profile in courage, I tried to dump it on my boss, because I asked my chief of staff to call over to the Attorney General's office and say, look, here's what Jim thinks we need to do, but he would welcome a conversation with the Attorney General.
Right.
And the answer came back, I'll never forget it. The answer came back, she disagrees, but she does not wish to speak to him. Now, you've been around a long time. I've been around a long time. I know what that was. That was, this is your bullet to take.
This is yours, baby.
And I almost thought, well, why don't I write a memo and send it over to her now? And then I thought, that's just cowardice. And I remember people in my family later saying, why does it have to be you? And the answer was, look, I'm stuck. And you're in this job not because you want to be popular. You got to figure out what the right thing to do is. And so that's what we did. And look, I pray to God someday some PhD takes the results of the 2020 election, where the polls undercounted Trump support and where the late-breaking voters broke for Trump just the way they did in 2016, and proves the FBI was irrelevant. But it doesn't really change how I think about the decision. We could not choose the door of lying to the American people. We just couldn't choose that door.
Yeah, no, and it goes to how we started the conversation. And again, thematically part of Central Park West is the independence of these agencies. That's how they work. That's how our system requires them to work. And I think one of the dynamics that the politics distorts the lens through which we look at the FBI and the Department of Justice. And we see that now. We hear it now playing out with the indictments, listening to Republican members in the House in particular, but even presidential candidates lay blame at the foot of the institution for doing the job. I mean, there is no political upside for you as FBI director or Merrick Garland as Attorney General to put their finger on the scale because it's so easily revealed. I mean, that's a good, the whole email story is a good example of it. If you deliberately set out to do that, you would do that presuming no one would ever know, right? Yeah. I mean, that what's the point of putting your finger on the scale and showing everybody you're doing that, right? It strains credulity, but the politics sort of drives the narrative.
Yeah, and people see it. Look, today in America, there are people who hate me on the left who don't realize
the election, right?
Yeah, who don't realize there are people who hate me on the right for the opposite reason, but they're each thinks that I was on the other team's side, and it's just a sign of sort of the depressing confirmation bubble they live in. They can't imagine that there's people on the other side. And so sometimes when people say nasty things to me, I have to pause and say, so is that hate coming from the left or the right? and so look, it in a way that's freeing. You just need to figure out what the right thing to do is. The FBI is in this strange place where we intentionally as a country spent the last half century insisting that it be independent. Right? Hoover used to do favors for Democrats and Republicans. Right. So when the FBI got in a storm, Hoover had people who owed him in a big way and who were incentivized sometimes by fear of him to back the Bureau. In a way, the Bureau's independence means it has no friends in high places in the way it used to. And its independence in some ways is a threat to its independence, but we wouldn't want it any other way. You just have to have that investigative authority separate from the partisan passion of the day, and it'll stay that way. I hope that the leadership doesn't overlearn the lessons of my experience, right? Sometimes I think, who would want to be me? I'm a happy person, right? I made decisions that I'm proud of the way they were made because they really were made with integrity. And so, yeah, people who don't get that will criticize you, but that can't be front and center for a Justice Department leader making a decision. They got to call it on the facts, and then what follows.
What follows. Well, real quick before I let you go, because it is a seminal moment in our nation's history. The not once but now twice, and certainly more serious indictment of a former president. How are you seeing that case right now and the prosecution of that?
He's in real trouble in Southern District of Florida. That's a speaking indictment, as you know, where the grand jury lays out essentially the story of the case. So folks read that indictment, they know what the evidence will be at trial. And Donald Trump inside a courtroom has a real problem. And so I think we really do face the prospect of a candidate being not just tried, but convicted. And if convicted, the recommended guidelines will call for jail time. And so we have faced the prospect of a candidate being incarcerated. And if you put that in your next crime novel, your publisher would send it back and say, there's no way, stop. This is supposed to be reality-based. But that's the reality that America faces right now. And so I don't have a particular view on the New York case, but both of these cases, what's great about them is they show the rule of law working in America, just like Donald Trump's lies being 0 and 60 in American courtrooms at all levels. That's the rule of law. And that, in a way, that's one of our saving graces, that our legal culture is so deep and so strong in this country. Say whatever you want in front of Four Seasons Total Landscaping with hair dye running down your face, but don't come into an American courtroom and give us nonsense, because there will be severe consequences for that. That's the way you know this. That's the way it really is. And the American people should take solace from that.
And I think they do. And I think the drama of all of this, notwithstanding, the underlying point that you're making, I think, is not lost on a lot of people. It's sobering, but it also is a reinforcement that no one is above the law. And the process, regardless of my political agreement or disagreements with the FBI or the Justice Department, those men and women get up every day and they do what they swore an oath to do. And that is something we should all take heart in. James Comey, Central Park West. Man, this has been great fun, and it's a great read, folks. Please get your copy. The summer's here. There's a beach and a martini with your name on it with this book. Trust me, mine is bourbon, so it works. But a little smoky bourbon on top of that. But James, I'm proud of the work, man. Proud of you. Appreciate your service to the country. I know it's not been easy. I was going to ask you where you stood with the Republican Party, because I get that crap all the time, but I'm just not going to bother.
Yeah, good.
You have shown us where you stand as an American, and I appreciate that very, very much. And good luck with the book, man.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on. Great to talk to you. Thanks for what you do for our country.
Thank you, man. I just a brother in the neighborhood, just trying to clean it up. That's it. That's what we do.
Day after it.
You got it. James Comey, author of Central Park West, a crime novel. It's a good read. Grab a copy of it and enjoy it. You really will get a kick out of it. Follow James on Twitter @Comey, and follow us on Twitter as well @Michael Steele and @Steele_podcast. I love it when you do the download thing, folks. Until next time, be safe and be well. Enjoy the summer.